So my name is David Hill. I'm with Radonaway, for those of you who don't know me. Been in the industry as a contractor since 1988 and then switched over to the manufacturing side of things about 17 years ago. Can't get rid of me one way or another, sorry. We decided we wanted to put together a conversation, more of a town hall kind of a presentation here about crawl space encapsulation. Bunch of us cross different industries. I sit on the board of directors for the Basement Health Association, which is the waterproofing and restoration contractors. And so I constantly see what they're doing there for waterproofing and moisture and see what we're doing over here for radon and VI. And it struck me that we really are crossing paths on a lot of things in our standards and in our practices, but yet we're not learning from one another. And so we felt that it was a good conversation to have. I don't even think we know what the differences are of the materials. So if you look at those polls that you have, there's a couple of poll questions in there. One of them is in the app. If you use that, please answer them, because it helps us gather information and make our presentations better, and also address what we need to for the future of our industry too. One of them is, have you done encapsulation for moisture? And the other one is, do you use barrier that meets ASTM E1745 class A, B, or C? And that's yes, no, or I'm not sure. And that's okay, because that's what we're here to do, is to educate one another. So to start off, I wanted to preamble that this is an open discussion. We've got a little bit of presentation from Dane and from Wes, and then we're going to kind of open it up a bit so we can talk a little bit about best practices out there and answer some questions. So with me is Dane Malmberg. He's the National Sales Manager for Viper CS. And I've got Wes Hodgden, who is basically born in the industry, who is the president of Midwest Radon, and the two of them have years of experience both on the crawl space encapsulation side of things and also the application of those membranes in the field. So we're going to open up with Dane, who is going to teach us a little bit about, hopefully a lot, about membranes, the types of plastics, what differentiates different levels or different types of membrane. That's a fair way of saying it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So please take it away. Are you guys mic'd up?
I think so.
Check.
That sounds great.
So Dave's absolutely correct. We've spent the last 25 years in business in the high performance vapor barrier world. Primarily, we've cut our teeth where it all started in the commercial underslab world, but we also saw a big transition into the residential space with the form of moisture control residentially and crawl space encapsulation. And what we've started to uncover there is there's a little bit of a disconnect between standards on the encapsulation versus mitigation side, but they're so closely related that the vapor barriers and the products used can offer a lot of similarities in just understanding what you should be using in those applications. So when I say quality vapor barrier, a lot of the times in our trainings what we hear is, the thicker the better. If I leave you guys with one thing, and a lot of you are probably going to already know this, but mil thickness when it comes to vapor barriers and vapor retarders measures one thing, and that's thickness. In the insulation world, we talk about 3.5 inches of spray foam versus 3.5 inches of fiberglass. Both 3.5 inches of insulation, but very different in how they perform. Vapor barriers are the same way. In the mitigation world, you can have a 4-inch fan, for example, that has very different performance standards. Both 4-inch fan. So when someone says I'm using a 6 mil, well, my competitor's using a 10 mil, that doesn't mean it's better, right? So we want to look beyond the mil thickness and really what performance standards make a quality vapor barrier. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So as a manufacturer, we have our initial option, right? Our initial decision that we have to make, and that's the raw materials that we're going to use. We can use a recycle regrind resin, which is very inexpensive, it's very cost effective, or we can use what's known as a virgin resin. That's a resin that's never been utilized before, and there's some big differences there. Number one being cost, but when it comes to the things that are really important, like the performance and effectiveness of it, that lends itself to using a virgin resin product. So a lot of the times you'll see in a standard 6 mil polyethylene sheeting off of Visqueen off the shelf, you're going to see a very high regrind content in there. And the drawback of that, while it may be inexpensive, is that it doesn't have the longevity of virgin resin product offers. So with virgin resin, you're going to get the longest lifespan possible, where a recycle regrind, we've seen it from core samples and under slab that break down as soon as 3 to 5 years. We've actually been in warehouses before and looked at material in the box that was actually brittle and cracking inside that box. So it shows you that putting a product down into a crawl space with a high regrind content, you're potentially setting yourself up for a disaster. If that product's going to break down on its own, let alone the construction traffic, you can run into some serious issues. So some of the big giveaways of regrind content are going to be that yellowish brownish tint in a clear product. Oftentimes a black poly or polyethylene sheeting is less expensive, and that's because you can hide higher recycle or regrind content in there. Virgin resin is going to be very clear, very pliable. I think most of us have seen 6 mil poly or standard polyethylene sheeting that's very brittle and cracking. That's oftentimes what you get with that product. You also, the more times you break down polyethylene resin, you lose those inherent performance characteristics of it. So if you're utilizing a resin that has a certain level of puncture resistance or water vapor permeance characteristics, the more times you break that down, the less percentage of that performance you're getting. So with virgin resin, you know you're getting the most performance possible out of that resin. Here's a great video of what 6 mil poly does or happens in the crawl space over time.
Show of hands, who's seen that?
Right?
Got some laughs along with it.
Yeah. So you can see by just a product like this in a crawl space that's not exposed to UV, right? It's not submerged underwater, but the product itself is just breaking down over time, and that's because of the raw materials that's used. So again, you're trying to provide a solution that's not just a Band-Aid, but a permanent solution. You want to use something that's going to last as long as possible. So after we've decided, okay, we know we want to use a virgin resin versus recycle, the other option or thing to note with a quality vapor barrier is single versus multi-layer extrusion. When we're talking about blown films or extruded films, you have the ability to be a monolayer film or a multi-layer film, where you can have several different resin selections. You can have a 3-layer film, a 5-layer film, upwards of a 9-layer film. The reason you would want to go with a multi-layer film is because you can actually manufacture to specification. We can select virgin resins that have phenomenal characteristics for water vapor permeance or soil gas blocking or intrusion. We can look at ones that have very high puncture resistance, tensile strength, and we can add all of those layers together to give you one of the highest performing vapor barriers we can. When you're looking at a single or monolayer film, especially with recycle or regrind content, you have a very high variation in what your end product is going to be. And a lot of times that's why when you see those base level standards, it's just to a thickness, right? Because they're using different product, different scrap material, oftentimes that's left over in the facility or recycled material, you can't always guarantee what's going to come out of there. That's why so long the standard has been just to a thickness. So you really want to go with a multi-layer film versus a single layer film to maximize your performance capabilities. And then what we found over the years, and what the industry has really found over the years, is even with a virgin resin multi-layer film, because of the construction traffic that you see in crawl spaces, homeowners wanting to turn that into a usable space, the fact that you have potential other trades coming in and walking on that, there needs to be a little bit of additional reinforcement. Historically, there's been kind of just one level of reinforcement. I'm sure a lot of you guys have experienced or seen is that string reinforced products out there that have a diamond grid pattern where you're actually extrusion laminating layers of polyethylene over a nylon string, which is a great option. It does give you additional benefits, but when you compare it to some of the other manufacturing methods, like woven reinforcement, you can see that there are some key benefits on woven reinforcement over string reinforcement. The biggest being that with a woven reinforced product, you're actually building in a rip stop throughout the entire product itself. So what you're doing is you're taking individual strands of polyethylene sheeting and weaving them together and then extrusion coating them on both sides. So it's not just the reinforcement of the nylon string. You're building a very strong material throughout the entire product, and it's all one consistent size and thickness. Where a lot of times with a string reinforced product, that thickness is going to vary based on the thickness of the nylon, right? The polyethylene sheeting may only be a few mils thick, but when you put that around the string reinforcement, that could give you a false reading on the mil thickness. But again, mils don't matter. What really matters is the performance characteristics. And that's what we really, as a manufacturer, try to focus on. Again, string reinforced, woven reinforced, single layer, multi-layer, it doesn't matter. Let's look at the ASTM standards and how each perform against each other. And so I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. This is the base standard for polyethylene sheeting in construction. This is ASTM D4397. And what this standard highlights is that base level of performance for polyethylene sheeting by each thickness. So if you run down, for example, table 1 there is your drop dart or puncture resistance test method. So you can see for a 6 mil poly, it has to have 260 grams of puncture resistance via that test. When you look at table 4, the specification for permeance, it shows you that nominal thickness, let's say 6 mil, it's going to have a permeance of 0.13. When we talk about vapor barriers versus vapor retarders, a vapor barrier needs to be 0.1 or less. So oftentimes anything 6 mil and less is not even a true vapor barrier, it's a vapor retarder. The difference may not be great, but that is definitely some nomenclature and vernacular to familiarize yourself, because if you're going in behind somebody else who's using an inferior product, these are things that are going to help you with that homeowner making those decisions. And so you can see you really don't even get to a true vapor barrier level until you get to an 8 mil or thicker when it comes to standard polyethylene sheeting. So this was kind of the base level for a long time here, but recently, and especially in the commercial construction, and this is what your standard on the mitigation side refers to as well, is ASTM E1745. And what this does is it really breaks down vapor barriers into 3 categories. You have your Class A, Class B, and Class C, with Class A being the highest based off of the performance that you get. So you can see in every one of these classes, you have to have a true vapor barrier. You have to have a 0.1 perm or lower. What moves you up the scale is then going to be your tensile strength, right? Which is going to be your tear resistance, and then things like your puncture resistance, where you can see Class C is 475 grams of puncture resistance. To meet Class A, you actually have to have 2,200 or 2,200 grams of puncture resistance to meet that Class A. So if we go back and look at this standard for traditional poly sheeting, you can see on the drop dart impact resistance test, the puncture resistance, 10 mil poly has 475 grams of puncture resistance. So it's barely meeting Class C when it comes to your vapor barrier on this 1745 standard. So again, you really want to look at the specific details and performance standards that each product offer to see where they fall. Mil thickness, just because you use a 10 mil, doesn't mean that it's going to meet Class C. And this is something that we put together to really kind of put the proof in pudding that mils don't measure. We actually went out and retested our product, which is actually a 10 mil woven, and we compared it to the leading 12 mil string reinforced. Because oftentimes in the waterproofing world or the encapsulation world, the higher the mil, people perceive that as a higher value. So you can see via the exact same test methods for puncture resistance, tear resistance, water vapor permeance, you can have a lighter film, a less thick film, offer exponentially more performance characteristics. You can see in puncture resistance, over double the puncture resistance in a woven reinforced product versus a string. So again, mills don't matter when it comes to vapor barriers. What really matters is those specific performance criteria.
So let me get this straight. So with the 12 mil string, you're saying that you just taught us before that the 12 mil might measure the width of or the thickness of the string. So we're not actually looking at, is that part of why it doesn't meet those same criteria? Because the string's really not helping you unless you drop that dart test right on the string itself?
Right, so when you look at string reinforcement is great for tensile strength, right? It builds that ability to, if it were to get torn, it's not going to continue to tear versus an extruded film. But when you're looking at things of puncture resistance, that string is not throughout the entire product. It's a diamond grid pattern. So there are areas that can be punctured in between those strings that don't offer any additional value. When you look at a woven reinforced product, that is, we're actually weaving individual strands of the polyethylene as tight as a 12 by 12 per square inch pattern. So that really beefs up your puncture resistance, and you can see that as it relates to the testing here. You can see how you can get over double the puncture resistance in a product that's thinner and lighter. And then as far as permeance, water vapor permeance, you can see obviously the lower the number, the better. A much lower water vapor permeance as well. And again, that's going to directly translate over into the soil gas and vapor intrusion world as well. So we know from the molecular standpoint, as a soil gas molecule being a little bit larger than a water vapor molecule, it's going to do a phenomenal job at stopping that. One thing to keep in mind as well is that there's no standard for it right now, but there are some new tests that are out there for radon diffusion coefficients as far as blocking soil gases, and specifically radon. 6 mil poly, standard poly, visqueen, those aren't going to be tested for those standards. You want to find companies that are doing everything with soil gases as well as water vapor. Especially now with the ability to add additives like ethylene vinyl alcohol and EVOH layers that do a phenomenal job at blocking soil gases beyond radon like methane. So vapor intrusion jobs, brownfield redevelopment sites, those are things that are critical for you that come with high performance vapor barriers, but not standard poly sheeting. And then this is just some pictures to show from the moisture control world what a lot of the crawl spaces look like when you use quality materials and some of the differences there, just to show you how well it lays and looks. So, but yeah, that's what I have. Any questions as far as what makes a quality vapor barrier? I'm sorry? Yeah, fire retardant.
Are any of your products fire retardant?
Yes, absolutely. So,
And are they stamped so that anybody that comes in and looks at the job would say, okay, it says fire retardant on it?
so yeah, there's nothing printed on the material itself, but as far as that standard, that ASTM E84 Class A, Class B, Class C standard, they are Class A fire rated, or can be Class A fire rated when we're talking about, I guess, my company's products in particular. But that's one thing to denote as well when you're looking at it, is to see what is their flame spread and smoke development. Standard polyethylene sheeting may not have that, where you see an FR additive, right, in that. With our products, because of the materials and the raw materials we're using, we were able to pass those standards without any additives. In some crawl space vapor barriers, you'll see things like UV inhibitors or UV additives, right? In a crawl space, that's not critical. That's not something that you're going to experience a lot of UV light. So a lot of those can tend to be a marketing ploy or marketing gimmick. Again, look at the testing beyond that. Look at the actual standard beyond that. But yes, to answer your question, yes, our products do meet Class A E84 standard.
So,
yes.
before we go on,
Question, how do you secure it to the foundation wall, and then how do you seam it? And how many mills do you have in it, and is the process for securing it and seaming it the same?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think Wes is going to get into what your standard is on that side, but I can speak from the waterproofing and moisture control side. From our recommendation standpoint, we always recommend overlapping a minimum of 12 inches. So we want to see that. We know from a performance standpoint, you could probably get away with 6 inches, but we recommend that 12 inches just to give yourself that extra leeway. And then we do have what we've tested as a 4-inch white poly seam tape. So very similar to the polyethylene seam tapes that you guys utilize today. We've tested that as well. So when we do our E96 testing or radon diffusion coefficient testing, that utilizes the tapes that we've tested with our system. As far as attaching to the foundation, whether that be 1 foot up on the foundation wall or all the way up, we see a lot of that in the encapsulation world, where it's ran all the way up to the sill plate, or at least 3 inches below that if you have a termite inspection gap that you have to leave.
Yeah.
When you do that, we have a double-sided, or a lot of times people are using a double-sided butyl-based tape as a temporary hold, but mechanically fastening is definitely the permanent hold there, and then leaving yourself enough room to come back and seal with a urethane or sealant of your choice, right?
So urethane will stick to it?
I mean, yes, it will stick with it. It can be removed, it can be pulled off. Polyethylene is one of the things that, right, like when we talk about urethane spray foams or urethane sealants, that it doesn't really want to grab. But with a woven reinforced liner, it does offer a little bit of texture, so it does grab it a little bit better than most, let's say, just an extruded blown film. So it won't peel off just as easy. But again, you are gonna run into that potential issue with anything.
So let's hold the rest of the, if you have an install question, let's hold the install
Sorry.
question until we get through Wes's presentation, because we talk about what the standards are, and then we can kind of open it back up and, to all of this, because I think it's very relevant. I think we all do different things too. So do we have anything that's specific on a question as to the barrier itself, what the makeup of the barrier is, and how it then gets tested? I mean, the one revelation I had was that, oh my gosh, I never realized that the mill was from the thickness of the string, not the actual barrier itself. And that was, to me, probably the biggest thing I took away from this presentation. And I'd also like to know who uses a non-reinforced barrier. I mean, I have in the past, you know, so there's a lot of us who are probably still doing it out there too. We sell a lot of it. So I know that there's a bunch of us out there doing that. Doesn't mean we've done things wrong, it just means that we're learning more right now.
I have a quick question. Is the material on the top of your barrier the same as the material on the bottom? Because I know that we've had some that's white black that I've been told that they're actually different chemical properties. There's a reason why the black goes on the bottom as opposed to the top, other than aesthetics.
Sure. We've heard a lot of different, I guess, theories onto why using the white black. We've heard things like of organic material growing, not wanting to grow with the black side there. Our products, I can tell you, our products are consistent, all one solid material, right? It's white on white because it is white PE tape woven together. It is not two different separate materials that are extrusion laminated together. So it is one consistent material throughout. What we have found is that there's no value in offering a black versus white side. What we do know is that homeowners, end users, like the clients, they love that bright white finish that the crawl space offers. Oftentimes when we ask people in our trainings to describe a crawl space, it's dark, it's dingy, it's musty, it's nasty, right? You're able to turn this into a usable space for them. And so that bright white finish is really what we've found as beneficial. We can do any color under the sun. We've done orange, we've done blue, we've done gray. But in reality, in this application, white is best. And we put it on both sides, that way it doesn't matter which side. If you've got somebody new in the field, yeah, which side goes up? The white side.
That's good. Good. Thank you for that answer.
Yeah.
So let's turn to the standards part of it. Wes?
Sure. I think it's an interesting transition coming from Dane when we talk about those ATSM or ASTM standards as it relates to tensile strength and durability and permeance and things like that. In the radon world, most often the things that we're concerned about are things like durability when it comes to those membrane and that membrane material. The primary reason that I think that we're concerned mostly about the durability and tensile strength of that material is that it's not often being installed as a passive membrane. We're usually coupling that with submembrane depressurization. We're drawing air from below this plastic sheeting. So what we're trying to do is create that plenum to be able to pull air from, just as a transition on the material. Currently, our standards require that we use the ASTM product, the E1745 that Dane had described, and to be installed. And to the question over here of securing the membrane, and most of this will be as part of a passive installation. We'll touch on submembrane depressurization in a moment. Obviously, it's to be durably secured to the walls so that if somebody accesses that crawl space, they're not just pulling the plastic sheeting off. The seams, and this is again in a passive membrane installation, our STANSI requires that we have the 12 inches overlap that you had mentioned. And again, this is so that we have some sort of barrier so that if the plastic was to shift, it's not just opening up wide open soil gas entry. It does not require that those seams be welded or taped in a passive installation. We get into pipe penetrations, things like that. Once again, need to be sealed up around those penetrations through the membrane materials. The big one that we see a lot of in the field, labels. I can't tell you how often I've walked into a situation to inspect a treated crawl space, and there's not a label to be found to give anybody an indication of what was installed or why it was installed. This is a good statement. This is taken right out of the standards. You'll notice that the word shall is being used here. It's not a should. Located in a conspicuous place so that when you open up that panel to look into the crawl space, you easily see the labeling. Again, from a field perspective, it's more often than not, we don't see labels on these. These are some of the other important items. Yes?
Are you aware of any labels that will stick well to the material? Because you put labels on, it's just a sticker and it'll peel off because of the vapor barrier.
Well, personally, I've never had any problems with the stickers peeling off. Again, I don't know I guess it's a matter of what's manufactured, but generally speaking, the newer vinyl material stickers, I've not ever had any issues with. Sure, the old paper labels and paper stickers certainly might. If there's an issue there, it's easy enough to put that on the crawl space entrance port. Or spray adhesive, something obviously. It needs to be as permanent as the plastic that you're installing. But I don't know of any, offhand anyway, any products that might enhance the durability of those stickers. Again, this is all directly from the current standards. We've got to note that the plastic sheeting was installed for radon reduction system, or in the VI world, a soil gas control system. Making note to not alter or damage that plastic membrane. Obviously, it all seems like basic stuff, but all too often in the field we run into situations where none of this has been done.
I never labeled it.
You don't?
No, for years ago when I was doing it, I never labeled it, and because there was no standard for that. And the standards have evolved, as we have too, to learn that in order to be protective of the consumer, we've modified our standards as we've gone, because we realize we need to label this. People don't realize what this is for.
Well, what happens is a new homeowner moves in, doesn't like the look of the plastic, and tears it all out of there.
Right.
Never notifies the radon company. This is a reasonable diagram showing, we get into submembrane depressurization, and for those of you in the room who don't know what that is, we basically install this same membrane material that we've all been talking about, but then we install a active mitigation system or a ventilation system to the underside of the plastic sheeting to create negative pressure to draw soil gas out before it can enter into the crawl space and up into the living space. The submembrane depressurization is obviously effective for radon mitigation, but it's also effective for VI mitigation, moisture mitigation. We've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, we deal primarily from our perspective with a lot of water moisture control specialists. That's where our background has really came in. And the biggest difference, right, is that active depressurization system. So we, a lot of times, our encapsulators are right there, and that's the same goes for you guys on the mitigation side, is that there isn't a big difference between being able to encapsulate for moisture control reasons, but also mitigate for radon. And so I think that's where the crossover is really here. And you see those big jobs of crawl space encapsulation that have huge job tickets associated with them. There's not a lot of difference there. But for whatever reason, the homeowners are much more willing to pay for that. And that's where I think adding those complementary services and the right materials can get you guys to that same arena.
Yeah, and as it relates to the installation for submembrane depressurization systems, the current standards do call out a few other additional items that need to be done to the membrane to the point of sealing seams and things like that. But here's the point that I made earlier. What we're trying to do here is create a retarder. We're trying to create a plenum, block soil gas entry from coming up into the living space. And try as we might, we will never get that crawl space plastic sealed 100% airtight. And so the idea here, again, this is back to durability and tensile strength, because what we don't want to happen is large openings to occur that, number one, would affect performance of the ASD system, but also affect the performance of the membrane that's been installed. So the current ANSI-R standards require a few additional things for this installation. This is where we get into the seam sealing. If you're going to install an ASD system or a submembrane depressurization system underneath this membrane, we can no longer just overlap 12 inches. We're required to have those seams welded or taped closed. Again, if we don't do that, we're just going to begin drawing air out of the crawl space. And that's not what we want to do for various reasons, energy efficiency, system performance reasons, things like this. You'll see that we also call out some ASTM standards for compatible sealants. These are all important. Or, to Dane's point, most of the membrane manufacturers also provide a tape that complies with that material that's being used. We're also at this point then required to have the membranes attached, mechanically affixed, and sealed to the outer perimeter foundation walls for the same reasons. If we leave large gaps and openings, we're just going to begin drawing air out of the crawl space, which we want to try to minimize that. And try as we might, like I said, we'd love to be able to get a 100% seal. If we could get a 100% seal on the membrane, there would never be a reason to install an SMD system, but we never will. It doesn't mean that it's ineffective. The systems are effective, but we don't want to have large openings. We want to try to minimize those openings. Whoop. There we go. No different than what we previously discussed, pipe penetrations, and specifically the pipe penetration for the SMD system that extends to the underside of that plastic sheeting. Again, in the field, we'll arrive to inspect an SMD system that's been installed, and there's a large opening where the ASD pipe goes through. The opening to that ASD system is about a foot away from that slit in the plastic, and you're sucking more air out of the crawl space than you are from the underside of that plenum or the underside of that membrane. So we're required to seal those up. These pictures, and we'll get into this in a little bit in more of a discussion manner, but these pictures are more what traditionally is done for radon mitigation. Oftentimes that plastic sheeting is not extended up the foundation walls to the sill plates. Usually getting it to the foundation walls and within the first foot or two, anchoring that plastic sheeting and sealing it up. The picture to your right, you can clearly see that the radon system has been installed to the underside of that plastic sheeting. There is a great debate about what we do underneath that plastic sheeting. Do we install vapor mat? Do we install corrugated piping? Do we just get a piece of stick of PVC pipe in there and get it 10 feet away from that opening? You know, quite honestly, all of it is going to be effective. What we don't want is that opening to that suction pipe to be right there at that seam or that opening into the membrane, because all it takes is for the membrane to get pulled off the pipe, and now again we're just sucking air out of the crawl space and we're not moving any air from the underside of that membrane. Crawl space depressurization, not to be confused with that SMD. Has anybody in here installed a CSD system? A few of you. Yeah, kinda? What was that? You didn't seal the membrane and therefore you had a CSD system? Is that? This in the field, these two terms seem to be interchangeable. Oftentimes technicians don't know the difference. Crawl space depressurization is only installed if you can't get in the crawl space. How else are you going to move the polluted air or the elevated radon concentrations out of this space if you can't install a membrane? In those situations, we do our best, again, to seal up the outer perimeter, openings to the living space above, and in simple terms, we stick a pipe in there and suck the hell out of it. It's the least desirable method of radon mitigation because the impacts go well beyond mitigating radon. We end up with massive energy loss in the building and a number of other things. Here we go. This is to that point. We've got, it should only be installed if the crawl space is inaccessible. Sealing all of your surfaces that adjoin to the outside. So if you've got crawl space vents that go outside, we've got to seal them. If not, the system isn't going to be effective. All that's going to happen is that we have no pressure in that sealed space, and we're going to begin pulling outdoor air in, or worse, we're going to pull treated air down from the living space through things like plumbing openings, AC, HVAC openings. So again, all of these things have to do, when you move into this world, we have to look at the crawl space as a whole and make sure that we're not sucking air from other parts of the building. The next one here is, again, this is directly from the standard. Should only be employed in the event that you can't safely access areas of the crawl space. If we can get into the crawl space, we should not be doing crawl space depressurization. We should be installing a submembrane depressurization system. And this is even more important. If our only option is to install a CSD system, we best make sure that we're not backdrafting furnaces and water heaters or gas-powered appliances. Seems a little redundant because if you can't get into the crawl space, you're probably not installing a furnace down there either. But it's a valid point. People die much quicker from carbon monoxide poisoning than they do from radon. So this slide here is a bit of a mess, but that's okay.
It opens up the conversation.
Yeah.
So, you know, I appreciate you going over the standards on that and teaching us a little bit about the plastics. You know, we threw this up here because when I took a look at the two presentations, and you have one is installed for the moisture management world by that Basement Health Association world. The other is our common radon kind of mitigation world. And we have standards that are very similar to the practices that are being done in the waterproofing world. And it shows you the differences right here. We threw them all together just to say, well, why do we stop at the base? Do we not care about the moisture coming through? Don't we sometimes get radon coming through the block walls in the crawl space? Does anybody here go up the wall at all with their membranes? Who goes up the whole wall? Goes up the wall? Halfway? Why halfway? It's more of an aesthetic, so it doesn't pull away from the wall better? To, I
The
can't hear.
exterior grade?
To the soil level.
On the
where
exterior?
the exterior of the soil level is, yeah.
So one question that I have, and I've been able to talk to a couple people this weekend so far, but in the mitigation world, is everyone always sealing up the vents on like an SMD scenario?
No,
So
is
so
simply put,
so-
unless we've got this situation. Yeah, in an SMD.
Yeah, so that's, I would say that's one of the biggest differences that we've noticed from a moisture management side to a radon management side, is that a lot of the moisture that happens in a crawl space is coming from those vents, right? You guys are all familiar with stack effect, and a lot of times in those hot, humid climates, what's happening is that warm, moist air is coming inside of that nice, cool crawl space, and it's condensing on things like ductwork, on the insulation, and saturating. It's causing all those issues of mold and mildew. So really, you can go in there and put down a fabulous SMD or a mitigation system, but with those open vents, right, you can still have moisture get in. And if you're not running that vapor barrier all the way up the wall, through the mode of capillary action and capillary suction, you're going to see moisture in those block walls. That porous block wall literally, just drinks up the moisture in that soil below. So, I mean, for you guys, the opportunity is to take that one step further, seal those vents off, control the moisture along with the radon as well, and really offer the best practice type system.
Yeah, so these are types of things. Yeah, can you come to the mic?
I agree with your comment, once the barrier is down, if there's no barrier down, it'll seal off, because you're actually allowing the moisture to release
So that's the concept, right? That's the whole reason why vented crawl spaces were invented, right? The idea was for an air exchange. What we know from the Building Performance Association, as insulation and air sealing has gotten better, that air exchange is not happening, right? What we're seeing is that 40 to 60% of the air that we breathe is coming from that crawl space, right? So when you have that vented opening, right, you're allowing all that warm, moist air to come in. You're creating that problem. So what we So you're right. You can definitely utilize traditional, what we would call traditional ventilation, right? But what we want to do, what we think is a better solution, is to be able to control that ventilation, right? So you're almost creating a mini basement in this standpoint. You're sealing it off. You're taking your thermal and building envelope and taking that down below grade, and then the burden becomes on the homeowner or the contractor to control that ventilation correctly. Because if you're just allowing for negative and positive pressure on the home, or just say, hey, well, my house is the right amount of leaky, that's where you start to run into some issues because of energy upgrades and energy loss that you have to address as well.
No,
not
energy
as
company can't.
not as a singular solution.
They shouldn't be doing
Yeah, it's got to have other components.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're going to do that, other components have to be employed.
Right, so let's slide that off of that into another topic. Appreciate that.
I've never personally done crawl space depressurization. I'm just not very comfortable doing it. But it would seem to me that if you close off all your vents and you do everything you can to prevent any airflow coming into that crawl space, and you apply suction to it, the air is coming. It's got to come from somewhere.
Oh, yes.
Now, it seems to me that that place would be from your conditioned space. Wouldn't it make sense to have, if you have vents in there, you have the suction on one part of the house, having a vent on the other side of the house, so you're pulling it
No.
through?
No,
So-
and the reason that you wouldn't want to do that is, well, there's a number of reasons, but primarily in cold weather climates, if there's water heaters down there, or water pipes down there, you're gonna freeze every water line in there. In warm weather climates, you're gonna create a humid, damp situation. Again, you're pulling outside area, and so you wanna minimize that. You want to, both from the exterior of the building as well as the treated living space above.
So I want to hold off for a second. We're getting into a whole different subject that we didn't actually want to cover today, which is, you know, a very small portion of the industry. I really want to rein this back into crawl space encapsulation, because there's a lot of things that I'd like to share here. We only have a couple more minutes. So can we keep it on the crawl space encapsulation part of it? And then we can go from there.
All right, quick question on the radon reduction labels. Now are we going to combine it with the vapor intrusion and radon reduction thing on the labels? The problem I see with that is you start putting vapor intrusion, you're going to scare more homeowners that are getting ready to buy a house.
That's
so maybe
why-
the labels should be separate.
So it's going to be a soil gas label.
Right here, the soil gas control system takes that language takes the fear out of it.
Yeah, and
for
you can
most
also
people.
install the label that fits for the application. So if you're doing it for radon, you just put the radon label on it.
Gary had a
We
question?
had a question over here first.
One of our biggest challenges is dealing with void form foundation walls. Are you familiar with that? Where
I
the
didn't hear you.
void form foundation walls, where you got piers, and then the foundation wall is, it's got like the cardboard at the bottom for almost the entire perimeter. So we've got like access to the exterior of the foundation. Do you have any tips on how to tighten those systems up?
So I guess, is that more of like a peer construction home to where you actually have the ability for physical bulk water to flow underneath it? Like it's kind of similar to what we see in like a flood house, like in a floodplain where it's built.
It'd be similar, but it's more in real expansive clay situations.
Okay.
So yeah, it's piered, and you have full foundation walls, but they're elevated off that crawl space grade.
Okay.
So there's a full 4 to 6 inches below the bottom of the foundation wall that you can stick your hand all the way under.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, in relation to radon entry, what I've seen in that situation is, obviously you can't interfere with drainage situations that might occur around that, but filling the void, be it with an expandable foam. Obviously it's situation dependent, but obviously you've got to fill that void somehow. I've seen in block wall situations where you have dual set foundation walls where we had to fill that void, and we couldn't do it on the soil because of drainage issues. So you fill above, meaning that you drill through and use an expandable foam above that. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah.
So from our perspective, I guess, or I should say, on the
2-minute warning.
Moisture controls perspective, in a floodplain house, a lot of times that vapor barrier or that moisture barrier is having to be elevated. For example, in Louisiana, when you're in a floodplain, you have to take that directly to the underbelly of the structure itself to allow for that, because it doesn't matter if you can put a vapor barrier down there, but if you don't control bulk water or you have bulk water issues, you're just going to create a water bed in that type of a scenario. So if you have the ability to seal it all off, and that's not an issue for flooding or bulk water purposes, I would definitely go the route of blocking and filling. We talk about that with air infiltration. When we're talking encapsulation, you want to seal up as much of that structure as possible. Those rim joists, any areas for air infiltration, that's what you want to block and keep out, just as you would above grade. That way you can control it and monitor that area as well.
Gary, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Did you have a
Earlier
question?
you raised your hand. I don't.
Oh, not just now.
Oh,
Earlier I was talking about the other subject, but you changed it, Dane.
Yeah, I did change it. It's for good reason. So are there, quick question for anybody quickly, and then I'll come right to you. How are we mechanically sealing? So think about that for a second. Like, I'd love a couple of answers from the field here on how we're doing that mechanical seal, and we'll come right back after this question.
Okay, this question is probably directed more towards you, Dave, but have you seen any of your mitigation clients, successfully transition from just, simply just putting a membrane down to depressurize to more of an encapsulation type?
We have seen some of them move towards that whole moisture seal as well. We're selling a lot more of the 6-foot barrier than we used to, and that's usually for draping on the wall. So they'll drape the wall, and then they'll do the floor, and then tie it together up on the wall. And so as we see more of that being sold, I realize more people are going up the wall now than they had been in the past. I think our biggest issue is that the suppliers like us are selling membrane that doesn't actually conform with the standard. And people say, well, why do you do that? And I go, because we sell stuff to people, and they keep buying it. It's not our responsibility to police it, but it's the responsibility of those buying it to buy the product that fits the requirements of the field. But we are seeing a transition, on all fronts. A couple of quick things. Dave?
We mechanically seal to the wall using furring strips, of course womanized, and we'll run the plastic up the wall, shoot the furring strips in place, fold the plastic down, and caulk with the urethane caulk to make it an airtight barrier, because we feel that's important.
Using that lip that you're creating?
When the plastic drapes down, you've got the corner where the furring strip is actually supporting it, and the block wall or foundation wall where you can put a nice caulk bead.
When you say shooting it to the wall, what do you
Hilti nail gun. Fixing it to the wall in some degree that it's going to be stationary.
I bet your installers love that as the block walls explode.
They get paid for it. They don't explode if you're careful. So, and in an industry which we've built that frequently is factored on the lowest common denominator in the industry, the people that are charging the least, you can see the difference in the crawl space encapsulations here. The clean one is probably $450 a square foot, including the verticals, and the others are either I'll throw it in for free because I want the job, or I'm going to charge you $1 a foot, so that's another issue that we have to overcome as an industry. We have to realize that if we're professionals, we need to work professionally, and there's a clear difference between what we're looking at here.
We had this discussion this morning. The three of us talked about this same thing because Dane, coming predominantly from the water moisture mitigation world, and Dave and I coming more from the radon mitigation world, and the answer to your question is pretty easy, or to that point is pretty easy. To add to that is that in the radon world, we have traditionally come from real estate, which means that oftentimes it's the person selling the home paying for the job. And he's happy if you put Glad bags in his crawl space. He just wants out. He wants to get to the title company, whereas in Dane's world, coming from a waterproofing or in moisture mitigation situation, more often you're working with a homeowner who's willing to pay that additional cost to have a quality product installed. And you know that. And we see that, at least in my world day to day, I see that transitioning though because of the current market. Where nothing's getting fixed at the closing or the real estate deal. So more and more in the radon world, we're going to run into homeowners, new homeowners, and those are people that are willing to invest a little more money to get a quality product.
And that's also why we now have these minimum standards for our industry. It's not to be costly to us as contractors. It's to be protective of the consumer that's moving into that home that is not aware that they're just getting Glad bags. And Glad bags aren't going to be something that protects their health for years to come. And so,
at least not in their crawl space.
Yeah, at least not in their crawl space.
And we've seen it, to your point, we've seen upwards of $15 a square foot, depending on the extent of the crawl space encapsulation. But really what drives that, if you talk to most homeowners, I would say 50% of them have not even been in their crawl space, right? They don't even know that they have one. So largely in our world, what we're starting to see are the trades that are down there that are driving that work. So a pest control company that's down there spraying and treating and inspecting, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you have a moisture problem that I would love to be able to address to you. So we see that opportunity as well in the radon mitigation side, where you're being called in for a service at the real estate transaction, but what you're uncovering is an opportunity from a moisture control perspective to say, hey, we can address the bare minimum here from a radon, but you have another concern beyond that with moisture control that you can work with the new homeowner or at least present that as an option in your bid and quote.
So that's all the time we have. I
Thank
really
you.
want to thank Dane and Wes for coming up here and doing this. I really appreciate your time.
All right, everyone, lunch is being served in the exhibit hall, so let's go, let's
So-
enjoy.
Dane does have a booth here, so if you have more questions about material, go talk to him. He's at the Viper booth, and Wes is wandering around. I'm sure you could drag him off somewhere and ask him
Thank
more
you, everyone.
questions. Take care.